Hey everyone, welcome to Mindset Talks, Life Beyond the Checkboxes. I'm your host or co-host, John Jaramillo, Leadership Performance Coach.
And I'm Prati Kaufman. I am a marketing energy coach.
The purpose of the series is that Prati and I, both as coaches, want to get to those everyday conversations that take place between the coaching conversations. As much as we love coaching, there's a difference between that coaching conversation and sometimes the real conversations on any topic that comes up that people are concerned about, that maybe they don't talk about in coaching sessions, just honest talks about whatever we may come across. And there are different themes throughout the series that you'll find when you see the list of episodes. Sometimes we just pick at random. This particular one, Proudy suggested that I talk about, or we talk about my podcast series, my other podcast series, the book leads, impactful books for life and leadership. And thank you, Proudy, for suggesting that, for being so gracious with your time to cover that. Overall, the podcast series is about getting to books that my network, those people have found important. There's certain books that people have read that just stand out, inspire them, provide value. Some people go back to the same books over and over again. And the conversations are going to be very different. And the thing is, at first it was about books that people would suggest that I hadn't heard of, but they wanted to have a conversation about. Then it's turned to also covering books that my guest and I have either already read, both of us, or will read together and then cover. And then finally, there's a lot of people in my network that are putting out books that they want to demonstrate the value, they want to show the value. And the best way for me to, the same way we do it here, Prati, the best way to, I think, show any value is just to have a great conversation about what it is you want to share. So thank you for letting me bring that up here. And hey, you can put me on the spot the way that I'm going to put them on the spot and ask me anything you want about what it's going to be or what my intention is and what I want to bring to the table.
Yeah, so I'm always all about the books. So I love books. They really change your life. It's amazing how much it can impact your lives without even knowing sometimes. So and I know you're always about the book. So what made you even start this? I know you wanted to learn more about the books, but like now you have a podcast. So what makes you so excited about the podcast?
I think you're right. I think because I share a lot of what I'm reading, people think I'm a huge reader. I try to read as much as I can. And there's just so many books out there to cover. You're not going to be able to cover everything. But in short, it started with the pandemic. I mean, it's pretty much like this series. I mean, you get to a point where, I don't know, for me, you feel a little more comfortable on camera. I'm not going to lie, because you're on Zoom all the time, or we're on Zoom. And during the pandemic, I think a lot of people were vulnerable. They were more straightforward. They didn't know where this pandemic was going to take us, right? So they were just telling more about themselves. You mix that in with the fact that I love reading different books, whether they're self-help books, leadership books, development books, any kind of books that can contribute to either your personal life or your leadership. And it was just a great mix of, okay, we all feel a little more comfortable on video. I think there are great conversations to be had on books. And then it's also, when you break down a great conversation, kind of like the ones we have here, you get to know people more. And it's not just going to be a question and answer. It's going to be finding out who the person is, how they got to where they are, and the lessons that they want people to take away from these books.
Yeah, and I think I saw recently on LinkedIn you were talking about Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, and who
Yes.
happens to be one of really amazing authors in his life, the darkness and the the his journey of his own life and what made him start to write these books. So Alchemist, I don't think was his first book. There was another book before that, but Alchemist really put him on the world map. So tell me a little bit more about that book. I think you read it for the first time, right? Recently?
Yeah, it was just this book that um, I think when I initially thought about coming up with the series, somebody had mentioned it. And it's a book that I see more and more in articles that I read. It's referenced in other books that I've read. It's one of those books that's been translated into, I don't know, maybe dozens, up to 60 languages. And it's funny. I read about the author and how he came up with this book and how he wrote it, and nobody wanted to publish it. Finally, somebody let him do it, or somebody did it for him, and then it just kind of started taking off. So even from his perspective, he didn't think it was going anywhere, but it just seemed like a lot of people referenced it as just one of those books that stands out. And it's definitely one of those books that people come back to on a regular basis. I've seen people that have said that they read it on an annual basis or every couple years, just because it's a novel, but it's got that kind of life development, life pursuit, of goals and what life is all about. And there's so many lessons in it. I believe I'll read it again just because every character gives a snippet of lessons. For you, had you read the other uh, books by the author?
Yeah, actually, I have. I've read pretty much all of them, and one of my favorite actually is 11 Minutes by him. So
Which one?
11 Minutes.
Okay.
And so it's really, I do love Alchemist. For I think that was my first introduction to what your dreams and how you're creating your life by thoughts, which I didn't understand it fully when I read it first time. I was too young to fully grasp the enormity and the teachings of the book. So it was more of a read, and it was a hard read because you enjoy the story, but you truly do not fully understand like what he's trying to tell you. And then I read other books, and then I came back to Alchemist, and every time I read it, I feel like it's just, I get different things from the same book, right? Like based on where I am with a life, I learned something else, and I which I missed out because there's so many fine details. But I think 11 Minutes still remains my favorite out of all his books.
So yeah, I've heard that from Alchemist that yes, it was a good book. Yes, I've read it, several times. And what you specifically said that I've heard people say also is every time I read it, I took something different away, or I found more information in there, or more tips, or viewed things differently. Especially depending on when you read it in your life. Like you said, when you're younger, you're not going to take the same lessons away as when you're older. Nonetheless, still a great book. I think it's a great book for a discussion. What is 11 Minutes about? Is that the title?
It really is about a story of a prostitute. So it's really, you have to read it. You really have to read that how an act of 11 minutes can be sacred. And he's basically really talking about a prostitute, having paid sex, but how
Okay.
he treats that experience itself.
Okay.
So yeah, it's a pretty neat book. So I mean, there's so many books. So do you have like I'm really excited about your books because I love books, and I whole my life I keep telling people is built where I am is because of the books. That was always a way for me growing up in a place where I did not have access to a lot of things. Books were the way I traveled around the world. I feel like that was my time travel. I could be in different places in a second and live and learn about people. Every book was so amazing. So even when it was cosmopolitan, the magazines to the books, like everything taught so much and gave a glimpse of a life which I had no idea about. And it made me really, when I moved to different places, I think all the things I learned because of the books, they kept me very grounded and very open to everything about different countries and different people. So how has the book, impacted your life?
I the one thing that stands out when I coach students in business school, right, that are going into their careers is I tell them, listen, you're in school and school follows a curriculum and you have to read certain books. This is why students are, for the most part, so bored in school because they're not reading things that they're necessarily passionate or driven or curious about, right? It's something that it's one size fits all. Everybody has to read the same book. And I tell them when you graduate, make sure you keep reading, because at that point obviously you can pick and choose what you want. Just because you don't have somebody in your network, in your family, that you're curious about, like a professional, like a doctor or an adventurer or whatever it may be, Just because you don't have access to that person, right, that you can reach out to, doesn't mean you can't learn about certain things. Everything is out there. We still have libraries, which I'm surprised by, but because everything is online now. But thank God that you can go and it's free and you can hold the book in your hand. And I can't say it enough how much, if you want to learn something, if you want to walk in somebody's shoes, as much as you can, obviously, pick up a book. I mean, the knowledge is there. When if you dive into the right book, if you dive into the topics that you're curious about, it's really like this person is walking you through what they want you to see, what they want you to learn, a view that they see that they want to show you and walk you through. Um, I don't know when it turned from being a chore into being something that was enjoyable. I think for me, it was more like in my 30s, um, when I went back to grad school. Because at that point, you have more years behind you. So I was like late 20s. You have a better sense of what you enjoy. So you seek out those kind of things. So I think that's when it changed for me in terms of enjoying those books. Um, and all different kinds of books. So it can be, I mean, mine are mostly nonfiction, but hey, the Alchemist is fiction, and it's still, if you craft the story the right way with the right characters, coming from the right values as an author, you can build any kind of world and outline the lessons that you want people to at least consider. They don't have to accept it because we're all so different, but at least consider.
True. Yeah. I mean, books also, for like some of the books which kind of you remember because they were so different and they really made you think differently. Like one of the books for me was Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. So when I read it for the first time, it was so different philosophy, the different way of thinking. And it was almost like a shock to my system that there are people exist who think like this and who are like so different. So I always tell my son that there will be he's 12, and that the next book I want to gift him when he's around 14 and 15 would be Atlas Shrugged, because I want him to go and see how people are just different. Like
Yes.
somebody
Yes.
who's so philosophical, very different, and so intellectual, and just amazing to read that book. Do I agree to a lot of things? Probably not, but it was such an amazing read still.
I don't know. I don't think that I've read a book that was on like the opposite end of a spectrum of my thought.
Oh,
Um, but that's one that I have heard of. And I'm not against reading something that I may not agree with. I think it's important to see where other people stand because those are your blind spots. You know what I mean? Those are the things that you don't understand, you don't know of. So it's better to even to round yourself out, because if you read something that you don't agree with, maybe it sharpens a little more a piece of you that can offset that, not fight it, but at the very least build you up in a certain capacity because you have a better understanding of how people think that's different from you. So listen, if I, and this is a formal invitation at this point, but if I invite you on there, well, as I invite you on there now, what book out of all these, and it's interesting from your perspective based on me growing up in this country, books were kind of like, all right, they're books. But for you, based on where you grew up in India and how you were traveling the world at certain points, they were like your gateways, as you said, to like new understandings, new worlds. Based on all that, I'm just curious, based on my experience versus yours, what's the book that stands out that you would say, okay, this is the one that I want to talk about. This is the one that's influenced me the most, or this is the one I want to mention to your listeners to get those lessons out there because it just did so much for me personally.
I'll have to think about that because I love so many books.
Okay.
So I have
Okay.
to think about that. Like, which one book, if I want to give to someone, like, what would that be?
And I laugh because I've gotten that from several people. They're like, you can't just have me pick one. So as this series gets fleshed out, I'm sure I'll come back to the same person based on another book that they have. So don't feel like we'll never get to the second and third book. But yeah, keep that in mind. Let me know.
Yeah, I mean, but the books which really made me look at life differently, believe it or not, were Mills and Boons, which were romance novels, which I used to read a lot when I was like young.
Uh-huh.
They are really well written, soft romance, and but they showed the world in a real setting. So the people were living, and the description was, now I looking back, I live in America, but every town they talked about whether or the place they talked about, it was such a real description of that particular place of living and how people behave. So now I'm looking back like, wow, I learned so much about different countries before I even went to that country. Like, yeah, it was just amazing. So
Yeah, I mean they're world builders.
yeah.
Um, any author, I mean, even if it's just one particular area of your life and routine, like they're building your world. They're providing you a manual, an outline, or a way of thinking that you can take into consideration. You don't have to accept, but take into consideration, depending on what it is. Um, yeah, they're just so many out there, and I'm glad that you kind of had that experience that before you came to this country, you had that exposure to what they wanted to share. But yeah, keep that in mind because when we get to it, essentially the questions that I ask are, number one, who are you today and how did you get there? So an insight into your profession, what drives you. And then I'm always curious because I'm just nosy what it is that led somebody to the field that they're in, whether they're a marketer, whether they're an IT professional. And I want to interview people from across the spectrum. So it's like, which book are we covering? What are the chapters? What are some of the chapters in there? Which ones stand out? And then specifically, what lessons did you take away from this book? And then generally, regardless of someone's background that's listening, how do you think they can apply those lessons to their life, regardless of whether they're a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, a volunteer, a young student? Like, there's a way to generalize the lesson across no matter who it is. So that's what I want to get to from people. And then finally, because I'm inviting them and they're taking the time to sit down with me, I want to find out what they're up to, the projects they have going, the initiatives, the business, what they're doing. So hopefully, I want it to be a win-win-win for everybody. And listen, when I've interviewed people in the past, and I've already held some of these interviews, they've enjoyed the experience because some people have said in the past when I've interviewed them that they've never shared certain things or that they've never thought about certain things certain ways. I try to be that curious. They don't have to give away their personal life, but I want them to take away from this conversation as much as I do, or anyone listening or seeing it on video. So there's you'll see when it comes out. You'll see when I start posting them what the gist is. But I want this to be a well-rounded experience for everybody involved.
Perfect. So I have one last question for you, and I get asked that question a lot. Is
Okay.
how do I encourage my kids to read? Like that's one question I get all the time from all the parents.
Your pace of reading.
How do I encourage my kids to read? Like my kids don't read; they want
Oh,
electronics. So I always get this question, like, how do I get my kid to read more?
I think I'm not a specialist at all. I mean, my kid is, 5 years old. He'll be six like next week. It's funny. I if we're around the house, everybody's hanging out doing their own thing. If it's like downtime, I'll grab a book and lay on the couch, hopefully not fall asleep, and read. And I'll see my kids emulate my reading. So if they're that small, I mean, they'll pick up little habits like that. When they're older, I would say start them with something that interests them. You know what I mean? What are their hobbies? What do they like to do? Who are the even sports figures or even celebrities that they look up to? And if it's an appropriate book for a kid to read, start with something they're interested in because it mixes what you want, them reading, with what they want to learn about something they want to learn about. And as they get older, as they read more about whatever topic or whatever person they're interested in, they'll see that they don't just have to go by the curriculum in school that picks the books for them, that there's knowledge out there, that if they see something on TV that's interesting, they can go and seek it out. They can look for things that are interesting. Right now, when kids are young, we're saying you're all reading the same book. It's like, I have no interest in that book. Okay, well, as far as I know, they still do this. You're being graded on it. So you have like your summer reading. These are the specific books you have to read. I think it comes down to choice. So if you put them on the path where they're reading about something they enjoy, they'll understand that reading isn't a chore, that it's a luxury, and it's a luxury that can fulfill you because you're out there seeking knowledge and gaining information that you're curious about. So just make it interesting and start with that. I would assume. Again, I'm not a child specialist, but I think that's something that would work.
Yes, no, totally. I agree with that.
And I mean, is your son reading anything at all now, or no, or just for school?
Oh, that's, I don't know if you watched the video on Facebook. I actually checked his school bag and there were 8 books. And,
Yeah.
and every time, like, oh, books to read in school, books, because he's a big reader. And that's how I feel like he became a reader because he always saw me reading. Even though
Yeah.
his father doesn't even read a single, like, he's never read a book. I think probably 2 books in his life,
Yeah.
willingly, voluntarily. But he always saw me with the book in my hand. Like every time I have a downtime, we have like magazine subscriptions, Reader's Digest, Entrepreneur, like Popular,
Yeah.
all of it.
E-
And as soon
even
as we come, we are so
even magazines, even
excited.
magazines, even articles about topics, whether
Yeah,
it's like a, I'm generalizing here, but like a car magazine or a photography magazine or whatever the hobby may be, it gets you in that habit of committing to yourself to reading. And maybe you start with an article, but it'll expand from there. But it definitely starts with something you're interested in.
totally. I mean, he doesn't read digital books yet. He only needs the books in his hand. So that's, I think both of us are just sitting and always reading when we have time. Whether we go out for lunch, we are reading. When we are on a hike, if we sit down, we're always reading. We carry books on a hike.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just happy that I'm reading as much, considering we have more access to like YouTube and social media and all that stuff. So even as the proliferation of everything online gains speed,
Yeah,
and you have streaming and Netflix and Disney Plus and Hulu and all this, I'm s- I'm reading even more. So thank God for that, or else I'd be a zombie sitting there in front of the TV.
exactly. No, so yeah, that's good. So, again, all the parents, if you truly want, I mean, not just reading, anything you want your kids to be that person. Show them and they will learn it. They will just learn it without even trying. So I think
Yeah.
that's the thing. So
Show them it's not boring. When they're young, they just envision that reading is boring, but show them, that it makes you a better person, that you've learned something. Even if you're reading a book, when you're done, say, hey, like this little tidbit is what I learned in this book. Um, I don't think we see that often. I don't think I've done it myself, but I'll start doing that. I mean, and I can't say I'm not going to sit him down like it's a college course and teach him everything at 5, 6 years old, but he'll pick little things up if I just kind of keep it general. Hey, I just read this book and this was interesting because, and then maybe he'll pick up that habit of wanting to seek out that
yeah,
interesting thing, that interesting stuff.
true. So this is, guys, if you are, watching this, please make sure that you sign up for the book launch podcast series. I think it's going to be awesome. And if you're a book lover, like there's nothing better than talking about books. So go and, watch for that, and do sign up for this.
Yeah. And a friend joked it's going to be like a book report. It's not going to be like a book report. I love to laugh. I love people. I love being curious, and I love digging to who someone is and what really drives them. So this is going to be some great conversation. Prati, thank you so much for suggesting that we cover it today. And then keep in mind which book it is you might want to cover with me, because I'm definitely going to have you on that series.
Definitely. I would
All
think.
right.
Thank
So
you.
thank you everybody for joining us, for watching, for listening. Please subscribe wherever you're watching it. Please subscribe wherever you're listening to it on your podcast platform, and reach out to us. John M. Jaramillo at coachitout.com and info@pratikauffman.com. It's up on the screen. It'll be in the notes if we post it when we post it on the podcast platform. So yeah, subscribe to both series and follow us on these journeys. All right. Thank you so much for joining us.